So welcome back to CVM Live. It's now time for the major stories in detail. And in a move to establish greater economic independence in Jamaica, the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke, has announced the government's advances in establishing an independent fiscal council in fostering inclusiveness in the policy discussion space. Here's CVM Live's Khadija Thomas with the report.
Economic independence is not independence from the International Monetary Fund, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke says. The move to establish an independent fiscal council concerns implementing the right policies in enhancing accountability for economic policy making.
Economic independence requires us to pursue policies that result in Jamaica having greater flexibility and increased ability to address priority areas as determined by the people of Jamaica from time to time.
The Finance Minister notes that this will allow for greater transparency around fiscal policy and will allow policymakers to maintain credible decision-making, the deviation from such warranting an explanation. While giving an illustration of Jamaica's budget, the Finance Minister says allocations have to be made for unplanned expenditure, which he identifies as the blue bucket.
And what people want, they want the government to work for them. They want their services to be delivered. They want their roads and their garbage and their street lights, things that cost money and that have to come from this blue bucket. So in order for us to meet the priorities of the Jamaican people, the strategy is and has to be the increasing of this blue bucket. So when I speak of economic independence, that is what I mean.
Dr. Nigel Clarke maintains that this approach will require the commitment of all stakeholders across the public and private sector in engaging partnerships and investment.
Fiscal councils are permanent, independent, non-partisan institutions staffed by competent, experienced, and technically proficient persons that help to promote economically sustainable fiscal policies across political cycles.
The Finance Minister notes that the Fiscal Council will have access to legislative data and will deepen democratic accountability by reducing the fiscal illusion where the public believes that the government has more resources than it lets on. Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
And Minister of Justice Delroy Chuck urged Parliament to send an unambiguous message to every family and community that when the youth do wrong, it is everyone's responsibility to correct their behavior. The minister was proposing the child diversion bill in Parliament on Wednesday. CVM Live's Joel Crossgill has the report.
Justice Minister Delroy Chuck reintroduced the child diversion bill to the House of Parliament in a bid to divert the nation's youth from a life of deviant behavior.
We will be doing everything to assist the young wrongdoers in our society to go straight. It is not our intention that these wrongdoers should just be charged, prosecuted, and incarcerated. We want to do everything within our powers to ensure that at every stage we give the child as much assistance to really lead on a straight and narrow path.
The bill seeks to enable the implementation of child diversion measures, which would redirect young offenders away from the formal court system into other methods of rehabilitation.
This bill could be a game changer for us to save our children, diverting them away from deviant and delinquent behavior. And so, Mr. Speaker, this Parliament, in passing this bill this evening, will be sending a clear message to all Jamaicans that we will be doing everything to allow our children to lead a straight and decent life.
The minister spoke of the role of the police in offering the youth a way out of potential conviction before a judge.
The police play an integral role, and at the very beginning, the police can decide, first, if it's a minor offense, to warn the child and release the child, and this is really an informal warning. But where, Mr. Speaker, it is a more serious offense or the child is very unruly and won't accept the advice, then this formal warning is executed, and the parents of the child will also be immediately brought in, interviewed, to ensure that the parents participate in really assisting the child to go straight.
Joel Crossgill, CVM Live.
Meanwhile, the involvement of the nation's children in criminality, whether it be as a victim or a perpetrator, was highlighted by Director of Security and Safety in Schools, Coleridge Minto, who also examined the connection between dropouts and a criminal lifestyle. Here once again is Joel Crossgill.
Director of Security and Safety in Schools, Coleridge Minto, revealed the startling statistics relating to children who have found themselves involved in serious crime.
Within the last 5 years, well, between 2011 and 2016, 304 children were murdered. If I break it down by gender, 65 females and 239 males. The same period, 2011 to 2016, there were 506 shooting against our children, 126 against females and 380 against males. We had over 2,000 rape cases, and this is an age group between 0 to 17 that we're talking about, and in this category only females.
Mr. Minto indicated that there may be a correlation between high school dropouts and a life of crime.
Region 4 has the highest dropout rate of students than any other region. Yeah, I know Jesus is right, but I'm not him. St. James, in this area, I don't need to give you any more stats as it relates to crime, because it's out there. And I don't have the empirical data to say that the dropouts are the ones doing the crime. But certainly when you look on the JCF 2012 prison inmate study, which indicates that nearly 60% of those who were incarcerated were either a dropout of school or left school with one or no qualification.
2 years ago, the ministry ordered that police youth clubs be formed in high schools. And recently it was revealed that basic schools would now be targeted as well, in a bid to deter the impressionable youth away from a life of crime. Now another branch of the security forces is also becoming involved in the protection of the nation's children.
That's why in the ministry we are now engaging members of the Counter-Terrorism and Organized Crime Division, CTOC, through Assistant Commissioner Fitzbailey. And why are we doing that? The gangs recruit youngsters as early as age 8.
Joel Crossgill, CVM Live.
In other news, drivers, mechanics and auto body personnel of the Jamaica Fire Brigade are on a sick-out. The workers started reporting sick at about 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon as a form of protest action against the prolonged delays in their wage talks. The National Workers Union is once again calling on government to return to the bargaining table. Here's Vaughn Thorpe with this report.
Pussyfooting around the issue. That's National Workers Union Vice President Arthur Grant's description in plain words regarding coming to some agreement between the workers contracted by the Jamaica Fire Brigade and the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. Drivers, mechanics and auto body repair personnel across the country are all on sick-out. This Grant expresses as a form of protest action against the prolonged delays in their wage talks, adding that workers are extremely fatigued and experiencing symptoms of work-related stress.
One of the reasons why the workers became so frustrated is that there are certain items that were agreed. For example, salary. We would have agreed on the percentage increases, those similar to which was given to the public sector.
Following contacts made with the acting permanent secretary from the ministry, Grant said he was told that they are awaiting guidance from the Ministry of Finance. He, however, stated the opposite is true.
I have personally made contact with the Ministry of Finance, The Ministry of Finance has no idea what the Ministry of Local Government is talking about. And therefore, we see this as a deliberate attempt by the brigade and the ministry, I would dare say, to frustrate the workers, to deny them of the benefits that they ought to be having as persons offering their skills.
Grant added that the union has also taken into consideration the impact of the sick-out on the public.
The aim is not to have the impact that it will certainly have on the public, persons who would probably call in if there's an emergency situation or so. The aim is to bring attention to the issues that are affecting the workers and for management to address them.
Vaughn Thorpe, CVM Live.
In other news, Jamaica's Transport Ministry has signed an agreement with the United States amending their air transport agreement geared towards boosting their bilateral relations and strengthening ties. CVM Live's Khadija Thomas has a report.
The Air Transport Agreement aims to foster the progress of international and commercial transportation between the United States and Jamaica by improving opportunities and efficiency within our transportation corridors. The Transport Minister says Jamaica had already signed the agreement with 29 other countries and is actively pursuing alliance with others.
Jamaica's Open Skies policy is facilitating and advancing this goal through encouragement of competition and expansion of international air service, provision of an open environment that will encourage operations into Jamaica's airports, facilitating the development of Jamaica's international trade, investments, tourism, and all sectors of air transportation.
Montague notes that the decision to amend the agreement arose out of negotiations at the 2017 International Conference on Air Services. He says this will allow for balanced linkages between members and non-members of the Caribbean community.
The same promise holds good for safety in our air as on the ground. Even as the ministry investigates last Thursday's aircraft crash in Trelawney, in which 3 persons perished, we continue collaborative efforts locally and internationally with partners and counterparts to ensure a safe, harmonized global aviation system.
The first U.S.-Jamaica Air Transport Agreement was formally signed in 2008. Amending the present agreement now aims to transform Jamaica's management of its reform programs within the air transport sector.
So we will be augmenting that partnership today by agreeing to allow all cargo airlines from our respective countries to continue to third country destinations without having to return home first.
Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
Well, celebrations are continuing for the youngest ever Top Cop. Constable Davian Martin was named the 2018 LASCO JCF Top Cop at the annual awards luncheon at the Jamaica Pegasus. The 26-year-old officer reiterated the call for greater trust and confidence between the police and citizens in the fight against crime. Here's more from Vaughn Thorpe.
Protecting, serving, and reassuring for 7 years, young Constable Davian Martin is Jamaica's 2018 Top Cop. In his address to the attendees at the annual awards luncheon, Martin encouraged his colleagues to join forces in building better relationships with citizens to tackle crime.
This is one of the ways we are going to be able to effectively fight crime, because in building relationships, people will develop trust and confidence in us.
However, to effect change will be challenging, but it is within reach, the officer added.
So let us all, as Jamaicans, get up, stand up, and impact the life of even one individual. That's a start, and who knows the ripple effect that this will have.
This year's finalists were buoyed by impressive accomplishments, including educational achievements and an array of community-based projects aimed at upliftment of youth. Sharing the honors were first runner-up Sergeant Floresel Thompson of the Motorized Patrol Division and second runner-up Constable Noel Chang of the Mobile Reserve Division. Founder and executive chairman of LASCO affiliated companies, Lascelles Chin, highlighted the necessity of recognizing good police work.
It is these men and women here who must ensure that the major investment in technology, vehicles or high-powered weapons
work for us, the taxpayers, to bring about the peace that has been eluding us. We are therefore committed to making the men and women of the JCF know that we value their service and protection.
Constable Martin was awarded a trophy along with a $350,000 cash prize. Vaughn Thorpe, CVM Live.
It's now time for regional and international news.
Making the top regional and international stories in St. Lucia as the Carnival Parade of the bands fast approaches. Band leaders are being urged to get a veterinary import permit for their products. The warning comes on the heels of the several outbreaks of the avian influenza virus in poultry and wild birds in the UK, Europe, Asia, Africa and Middle East countries in 2016 and 2017. More from HTS.
The Veterinary and Livestock Services Division is taking steps to ensure that the island's borders and citizens are protected as avian influenza bird flu virus cases increase globally. This also pertains to the upcoming carnival season. To this end, the division has advised that carnival band leaders apply for a veterinary import permit for costumes, particularly feathers. The avian virus was first discovered in 1983 and is a subtype of a highly pathogenic influenza that affects chickens, ducks and turkeys.
Feathers are they are animal products. At the end of the day, a feather is plucked off from an animal, from a bird, and so there is always that risk of contamination. And so we want to ensure that whatever feathers are imported, they are treated adequately to ensure that there are no organisms that can cause diseases, that these feathers will not be able to spread diseases.
Your news authority. So, 90-minute news program, panel discussion time. We are exploring something that we've all been talking about recently. Societal views towards homosexuality, general ambivalence towards society, widespread in some countries but scoffed at and condemned in others. So people say, Jamaica is a country that prides itself on biblical principles. The general perspective is said to be condemnation, but is that really true? Especially since Prime Minister Andrew Holness has made the subject topical again by saying that he is open to having gays in his cabinet, which runs counter to his predecessor, Bruce Golding, who said not in his cabinet. So, should we be openly embracing gay individuals throughout society, into all organizations? Is there a turn in the affairs of homosexual men and women? Of course, CVM Live, frank and open discussion, and we're going to try not to oversimplify a complex matter. We welcome Philippa Davies, Advocacy Officer of the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society, and Glenroy Murray, Associate Director for Programs and Advocacy of JFLAG. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this very pertinent topic which affects the lives of many Jamaicans.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So, JFLAG, Associate Director, what is the gay agenda? Because a lot of persons have now been saying, post Andrew Holness, Prime Minister serial remarks, that Jamaica is ready for the gay agenda. What is it, and are we ready for it?
Well, contrary to popular belief and what has been said previously, the gay agenda, this is a manifesto that we recently have created, documenting our visions and our hopes for a society which is LGBT inclusive. And within it, we represent the community as more than what we've been represented as in the media a lot of times, not caricatures, not people who are only concerned about the Bugger law and anal sex, but people who have broad interests. We want to disturb the narrative that LGBT Jamaicans are different from Jamaicans altogether. We live in the same country, we deal with crime, we deal with violence, and we deal with the economy. And so for us, the gay agenda is our own vision. We talk about in this very document things like minimum wage, wanting it to be raised to $12,000 weekly. We talk about youth unemployment being reduced to 10% by 2025. We talk about support for our athletes. We talk about support for persons in the creative industries. We are not people divorced from Jamaican realities, and what we want is to be able to have conversation about national development, conversation which includes us and protects us.
Okay, so in real terms, what does that mean, though, to the individual? Because when persons think about the gay agenda, they think about gay rights. They think about instances such as when the United States Embassy flew the rainbow pride flag to the ire of the Attorney General, who made a comment on Twitter. Is that a part of it or not? Is that in the manifesto?
Well, the manifesto has 68 recommendations, which speaks to, like I said, broad national development issues, security and justice. We talk about family life. We talk about youth. We talk about health, housing and social security, all the things that we'd like to see, which does incorporate us. Gay rights is a misnomer. When we loosely use that term, we're talking about rights for Jamaicans who are LGBT. And sadly, we have a legal system which has systematically excluded LGBT Jamaicans from several of its provisions. So for example, the Charter of Rights does not prohibit in section 13.3i, which deals with the right to freedom from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And these kinds of discrimination have been documented in different spaces, including at JFLAG. We have a human rights violation report, which is available online, where we talk about those incidences.
Okay, Ms. Davis, bring you in. What is your interpretation of the gay agenda? Because when you read the newspaper articles, there are various perspectives, two sides of the coin. Some persons say, this is foolishness and fake news. I don't understand what these people are talking about. What is your interpretation?
We're talking about a political movement, and by political we mean to change laws and policies on which society is based and governed. So political movement across the world primarily. We've seen the effects in Western nations, whether USA, Canada, UK, of adopting a philosophy about sexual behavior that is proven by public health data and by the outcomes in those countries to be harmful to the well-being of society, the governance of society. We've seen a political agenda that is intent on suppressing freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, of parental rights, of freedom of religion. We see a political movement that wants to reorganize society and that denies very basic and fundamental, male is male and female is female. So this is the gay agenda as we've seen it played out in these other countries. And Jamaicans would do well to ask the questions, what is meant by sexual orientation and gender identity? What has happened when those terms have been put into law and policy in these other countries? What has happened in those societies, and do we want this to happen here in Jamaica?
I would love when we have this kind of conversation that we do it using a Caribbean context. The narrative is popular. Let's look at the West and see what happens there, because that's going to happen here and we need to be concerned about it. I often find when we have the conversation, we don't try to have it on a regional and a local level, because you see small changes happening in various countries like Belize, like Trinidad, and it isn't what you describe. And so I'm very concerned when we import the kind of challenges that you find in other countries here, because we don't get to have the kind of conversation that is necessary. We don't get to talk about the points of our convergence, because like here, I'm sure you'd like to see youth unemployment reduced. That's something we're interested in, and I'm sure you like to see access to health for all. And that's
let me ask you this question.
Can I just respond a minute?
No, before, let me just ask this question. How much is your gay agenda document here in Jamaica influenced by the international gay agenda that Filippo described?
Well, it's not. I've never seen.
So there's no connection between an international gay agenda or...
It's locally driven, and so when you get to the welcome section, we talk about how we even got to there.
Is there an international gay agenda?
Not that I'm aware of.
So you're aware of no such international gay agenda?
No, I'm not.
But you have gay movements across the United States, as Western countries, as Filippo described, and they have a particular way of playing out throughout these societies. They focus on laws, they're political movements, they influence different things. They've influenced artists here in Jamaica to do other things. Does that not inform your own gay agenda here?
No, because the way we went about this was conversation within our own communities. And the issues that we looked at was stuff that was prioritized by our communities. Consultations.
But changing the laws here is not an important aspect of your own agenda?
Yes.
And what? Acceptance by society? What is that a part of it?
Tolerance and respect is a part of it.
Filippo, to get to your point, could you respond to the matter which you wished to address earlier?
Yes, certainly. Let us talk about the Caribbean and the Jamaican context and raise examples on what could happen here. Certainly we have our own examples. When you speak, for example, though, about raising the minimum wage and public health access for all, certainly we agree to that. But what does that have to do with redefining sexual behavior, or redefining what it means to be male, or what does it have to do with
redefining sexual behavior?
But this is part of your gay agenda.
Are you saying that the gay agenda internationally is the same agenda?
It is.
So you've been to all the countries and seen the same
No,
thing?
I haven't. But
What do you mean by redefining sex? I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
Meaning to say that a man who is genetically and chromosomally male, if he feels like he's female, he should be allowed to say that he's female and to change his birth certificate and his other ID papers. That's
So
happens
the
in
basis
Canada
of your
now.
argument is scientific?
The basis of my argument
Yes,
to say that if you're male,
you're saying
that
genetically and chromosomically.
yes, if you're XY and you are XY, you will never ever be XX.
Well, Philippa, what about the comments made by Prime Minister Andrew Holness? He said that 10 years ago it would be very different from today, and that today there's almost a tide in the affairs of homosexuals in Jamaica because he is accepting them into his cabinet. He's looking at competence.
Right.
Are views and issues different today?
Well, certainly we are talking about this more and more publicly. So 10 years ago, we might not have had this debate on national television. So this is happening now. And it is good so that we can hear both sides of the story and let both sides of the story contend. But I'm not so certain about the Prime Minister's comments to reflect the actual reality of the opinion of Jamaicans. When he says that we're evolving, meaning that we're changing or coming to a difference of opinion.
But views evolve, don't it?
But where's the evidence for the Prime Minister to say that, for example, when you consider halfway through in 2014 and 2015 when you had the Jamaica Cause rallies, when you look at the Bill Johnson survey that said 91% of Jamaicans said to keep the Buggery law, where's the evidence for the Prime Minister to come to that conclusion that we have evolved or changed our views?
Well, I mean, it's nice to look at the statistics, but what we found when we look at those kinds of statistics is that when you talk about the Buggery law, it elicits a certain response. But when you talk about equality and respect, you get a different response. So if you look at the National Crime Victimization Survey, for example, you see that many Jamaicans recognize or perceive that LGBT persons in Jamaica are not treated fairly. And that kind of understanding demonstrates to me an understanding that they should be treated better. And so how we have the conversation is critical. We are shifting, and I think what the Prime Minister was pointing to was the kind of conversation that was happening late last year between different leaders within the church about their stances on the Buggery law. And the truth is the lived experience of Jamaicans can testify that there is a change in attitudes. You can now be in certain spaces and not have certain experiences. You can be in the halfway tree as somebody who doesn't fit the gender mold and not always experience certain levels of harassment, and that's what we're talking about. There is more space for conversation.
But Philippa, let me ask you this question, and going back to science. Scientists now recognize that there is just not a binary aspect to sexuality. There's not a binary aspect to even sexes, that there's no longer just male and female.
It never was.
Really?
Where?
Scientists. So I'm saying...
Intersex somebody, that is a pathology. No, he's saying intersex, but he's confusing two things. Intersex is a pathology. Somebody's born with two sexual genitalia. It's not the same thing as claiming to be homosexual or a lesbian. So don't confuse those two things.
No, wait.
Let me ask you a question, though. Let me ask you a question.
They're different.
As science changes, and let us use an example like climate change. So the climate change, 100 scientists published a paper saying they believe that climate change exists. If 100 scientists were to publish a paper saying that this is what the sexes are, or that it falls on a spectrum and is not one or the other, would your true views change? Would the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society change its views towards homosexuality based on science?
No, not if 100 scientists say that male is female and female is male. No, we wouldn't change our
So
view.
you would not change your opinion in the face of scientific evidence?
Can I
I'm asking a question.
Right, no, because you must still refer to reality, objective reality. Science is going to
science
be...
is about objective reality.
Okay, on the matter of objective reality, for the benefit of our viewers, can we look to the objective reality throughout the Caribbean, as Glenroy touched upon, and can we look at the law? And can we look at external pressure in Jamaica? Because those have been things that are topical. So the law, Glenroy, explain to us. The laws which prohibit intimacy between consenting,
males.
Not only prohibits, but criminalizes intimacy between consenting homosexual persons. in Jamaica.
I clarify because we talk about homosexuality being illegal. That's a male-centered conversation. It has never been illegal for two women to consent to having sexual intercourse, any type of sexual arrangement or sexual interaction. And I'd stray away from the word sexual intercourse because you're going to become a bit persnickety about that. But that has always been a reality in Jamaica. What the law says is that anal sex is criminal and intimacy between two men is a crime. But there are multiple other laws. There's exclusion of same-sex relationships, not marriage, same-sex relationships.